In 2009, many people on Vancouver Island were surprised to learn that a company was planning on developing a new coal mine in the Comox Valley area. I'm standing in Buckley Bay. Buckley Bay is right behind me, and that's Bain Sound, one of the richest shellfish growing areas in the province. The proposed coal mine is less than 5 kilometers up into the mountains, just above me here, and Fanny Bay and Ships Point are just a few kilometers down the road.
You're not official, so you can read.
And I got involved in 2009 when the Compliance Energy Corporation had a open house here to explain their proposed project. I, along with a lot of my other neighbors, came away with a lot more questions than we actually got answers. The main workings of the mine, the above ground, is in the Cowie Creek watershed. You know, that basically that aquifer feeds into this whole alluvial plain we're talking about here. From what I understand, there's probably, you know, the hydrologists that have looked at it from our perspective say there's concern about the other aquifers and watersheds, the Sable River watershed, the Wilford Creek watershed, they could be impacted as well. That's the key part of this whole thing, is that we don't think that the studies that are needed to really answer all these questions are going to be, have not been done and will not be done if you look at the requirements that the governments federally and provincially have placed upon the proponent. In other words, we think they set the bar pretty low on what they're going to have to produce as studies and baseline studies. So that's a huge concern for everybody.
I'm strongly against it. Not mainly because it's a coal mine, but because of the fact that our drinking water, the mine will go under or through our water supply here, our aquifer. And all the science in the world is not going to tell me that that's not going to affect our water supply. It's going to affect our water supply. It has to affect our water supply, whether it diminishes it or pollutes it. Well, we moved here 6 years ago. One of the reasons we moved here is that I was told that there's never been water restrictions on Ships Point, and I don't want that to be jeopardized. We shouldn't have to treat our water or buy bottled water like so many people do nowadays.
There's signs everywhere against this mine. Everyone is really concerned about the quality of our water. Not only the quality, but also the quantity. We just don't want to lose it. We cannot lose it. It's it's the most important thing on life. It's water.
We bought the property in about 2004, mainly because of its pristine nature and the nice pure air and water that we had from our well. And the Raven Coal project was announced about 2009. So we became a little concerned about what the impact would be on our water. So when an opportunity came up to go to a public hearing in Union Bay, I decided I would ask some questions of Compliance Coal, and Raven in particular. John Tapex, the CEO at that time, was at that meeting. I had to stay until after 12 so I could get my questions answered because there were so many people at that meeting raising all kinds of concerns. But I asked Mr. Tapex at that time, so since Raven Coal is pulling out 50 to 60,000 gallons per day from our water table, what happens if our wells dry out? And Mr. Tapex looked at me and his answer was, would you be able to prove that the mine was the cause of the water table dropping? We have never lost our water in all the dry seasons up to now, so it's very difficult to prove something like that.
So if they can design, build, operate a mine that they can guarantee they're going to have zero impact on my water, then we got a place we can actually start talking. Other than that, I'm not willing to listen. And I think that's holds true for a lot of my neighbors, and I think certainly it holds true from the shellfish industry. They've as much as said that the Raven coal mine, this is the BC Shellfish Growers Association, the number one concern for them is not fecal content coming into Bain Sound from, failing septic systems or acidification. It's the coal mine, number one. So, and they've said as well, the acceptable risk for them to the shellfish industry is zero.
Well, there's an awful lot of data that the mining company had put together with its consultants. And inherently in this type of review, there are an awful lot of promises given by the applicant concerning mitigation of impacts, etc. What is the long term? Because mining creates a long-term legacy and risk to things like water quality. And the question in my mind has always been, who's looking after the long term? The legacy of tailings, for example, the legacies of acid mine releases, etc. These are very long term, and of course the public is here for the long term. The mining company may not be. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have mining, certainly we should, we depend on it. But we have to find a way to address the long-term implications of whether it's coal mining or any other kind of mining that leaves these long-term legacies behind.
I think we've all got some concerns about it. Mine aren't maybe quite as dramatic as other people's concerns. I think Quinsam coal is a very important part of our economy here, and I think the rules are in place by government that coal mining be done properly, but I'm a little leery about how well the governments enforce the rules that they're in charge of. And that's the only nervous part I've got about coal mining. But
No, at Quinsam, essentially, another element that was looked at it during the inquiry was the groundwater, and at that site, it was shown that the actual strata that they were mining was fairly tight strata, that it was very impervious to water movement. So that put a lot of, the concerns to rest about migration of material off there. If you juxtapose that against Raven, that doesn't seem to be the case there. The Raven is a much more gravelly area. There's a lot more people there living on the aquifer and using the aquifer for domestic water. Where at Quinsam, you were 20 miles from the nearest habitation, and the nearest habitations were down in Campbell River, which were serviced by a water system, and they weren't dependent on the groundwater. The Raven is totally different kettle of fish in that you're essentially perched right above a fairly large population of people who are depending on that groundwater for domestic supply. The groundwater doesn't have to actually come out in the creeks; it can come out in the subsurface into the sound itself. So there was concern of what's going to happen to that area, and that's something that in my looking at any of the Raven material that they didn't address, that they hadn't really looked at how much, what their impact on the aquifers could be. There could be a couple of impacts, because if they're getting water down into their mine and they're dewatering their mine, they could essentially dewater some of the aquifers in the area, so they could dry people's well out. The other concern is that once they leave the site and the mine does reflood, it could contaminate the groundwater, that there could still be movement from the mine into the groundwater area, so you could be directly contaminating the groundwater.
If we look at the history of mining, it's not very pretty. To put a coal mine that close to such a very sensitive river. The Quinsam is not very big. The water is by nature very soft. And in the fall, when they're discharging, the river goes very low. It can't dilute very well. When the company first started operating, their permit allowed them to discharge effluent 6 months a year, and that was during the wet parts of the year, when the river could dilute it better. But since they couldn't keep the water out of the mines, so they have to pump water, they have to release water every month. They had 3 permits when they first started, and they couldn't comply with any of them. They couldn't keep their discharges with 180 days a year. They couldn't keep their pH within allowable limits, and they couldn't keep their maximum daily flow into the limits as well. But our concern is with the future. Our concern is that originally they mined the soft, low sulfur coal. Sulfur is where the problem is. And that's all gone now. So now they're mining high sulfur coal, and there's more sulfates, and the sulfates they're a conduit to the arsenic. And so the clock is ticking, and I don't know where it's going, but it's a concern to us, yes.
Well, I just feel it never hurt us, and we've flourished with money raised from working in the coal mines and stuff, and this is who we are. And I just feel that my kids have left to go to Alberta to work, electricians, and and I really feel that we should have jobs for our kids, and this is part of it, is creating jobs so our kids can be home,
Well, labor costs are the main reason that a lot of, the bottom line is important to these big corporations, always has been, but it's more important now than it ever was, probably because of the high cost of fuel, labor, insurance, liability, and all that sort of stuff. Vancouver Island, compared to when I was in it 8-10 years ago, is probably only 33% of what it used to be. The amount of people employed in it, it's because they're in second growth, it's totally automated. Feller bunchers, whippersnippers, delimmers, and the sawmills now, the latest sawmills that are being built, and there's not too many of them on Vancouver Island, agreed, but in the interior, they just employ a fraction of the people they used to. It's all laser controlled and computer controlled, electronics, it's technology is being utilized.
Behind us, you can see the Browns River watershed area, which is Browns River flows down to the Putlage River and then, of course, out into the Comox Bay. This is the location that has been applied for a license for coal. The risk factor of these downstream areas on habitat, on water quality, and ultimately on the Comox estuary and Bain Sound is a risk that I don't think we can afford to take.
Well, you were asking about the other coal license applications around here, and essentially those to me a lot of that I've always said that there's a lot of mining of stock markets that goes on before mining of the ground, and there's a lot of mines that don't come to fruition. For every mine that does come, there's a whole lot of exploration out there that is for naught, essentially.
I worked in oil and gas for quite a while afterwards. There's lots of money there, but I didn't agree with what I was doing. So then I got back into music and skateboarding, which I love. I'm a mechanical engineer. I could work there quite easily, but I wouldn't. That's why I left the oil and gas industry after my master's degree. There's ethics involved, right? So if it's going to create 300 jobs, that's great. That's a good thing, but there's other ways to make 300 jobs. For instance, say installing renewable energy systems. Like, why isn't the money going there? I don't understand, because we're way smarter than that now. It's all about, capitalistic economics. Just, we need to get as much as we can now because we're not going to be around later, whatever kind of fear drives it. I know this about human psychology is that it's based just purely in greed and denial. So, and that's why we do these things. You know, it's not like economics invented us, we invented it. So.
One of the proponents was quoted as saying that in an interview that they had deep pockets and they weren't going to go anywhere. I guess that was supposed to scare us and we're supposed to cower down. So I'm proud of our community, and believe me, we're going to be in here till the bitter end, and I think we're going to come out on top of this thing.